Tacoma, KCKA Centralia.
Welcome back now to the second half of our live broadcast of a Prairie Home Companion coming to you from the World Theater in downtown St. Paul. This portion of our show brought to you by your friends in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, the little town that time forgot that the decades cannot improve, including the Chatterbox Cafe where Dorothy presides, the place to go. That's just like home. Time now to stop in at Dorothy's if you want to pick up some of Dorothy's own great fried chicken. Yes, sir, before it gets too hot, so she doesn't feel like doing that. Chicken fried the way the chicken itself would have wanted had it known how good it could become after its demise. Brought to you too by the Sidetrack Tap, where Wally and Evelyn wait to welcome you. The dim little place there on Main Street where the pinball machine never tilts, where the clock is always a half hour slow, the boiled eggs are fresh every month, and love never dies. Brought to you too by Ralph's Pretty Good Grocery. Remember, if you can't find it at Ralph's, you can probably get along without it. Let's come in here with just a little message from Worst Case Scenario. Worst case scenario, when it's important to know the worst that could happen.
Worst case scenario, Frank here.
Hey, the wife and I were thinking about taking in a movie tonight, and we sort of wondered what could happen.
Worst case scenario, you could bend over to see what was on the floor your foot was stuck to and knock yourself unconscious on the seat back and tip over into the lap of the woman next to you who could scream for the manager, and he could turn on the lights and shut off the movie, and people in the audience could pelt you with M&Ms and raisin balls. And by the time you explained everything, the newspaper reporter could already have filed his story, and the next day your boss could fire you, and in the divorce settlement your wife could get everything except your brown suit, and you could spend the rest of your life walking along roadways with a big garbage bag picking up aluminum cans.
Thanks a lot.
Say, Frank, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm the, I don't need to go into a lot of detail on this, but I mean, I'm the host of a radio show, and we were kind of thinking about doing our show live on television. What would be the worst?
Are you sure you want the worst case scenario on that?
I see your point. Worst case scenario, when you need to know the worst sometimes, but not necessarily right while you're doing it. Here's a little song. You all know this song. You feel like singing? Yeah? All right. Well, that's good. I don't know what I would have done if you'd said no. What's the key in this? In the key of F, is that all right? What does it sound like? Just give them a chance here. There's an old song, and the women get that beautiful high harmony part, that high descending harmony. Tell me why the stars do shine. Do you know that? The men sing the boring part, the melody. Tell me why the stars do shine. Tell me why the ivy twines. So you sound wonderful. Tell me why the sky is so blue, and I will tell you just why I love you. Need a few more basses now on the bottom. I pledge allegiance to the flag and the republic for which it stands. You don't need to rise. One nation indivisible, under God, with liberty and justice for all. This is my solo verse here, if you don't mind. In the the sudden loss of cabin pressure, the panel above, your heads will automatically open. Grasp the mask firmly and breathe naturally. Everybody. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I pray the Lord my soul to take. Because God made the stars to shine. Because God made the ivy because God made the stars so Thank you. Sounded wonderful.
One more spring in Minnesota to come upon Lake Wobegon, Old Town. I smell the coffee. If I could see you one more time, I can't stay, you know. I left so long ago. I'm just a stranger with memories of those I once knew, the old home place. I think I know that face. Just wait, I'll get it. How are you? One more spring in Minnesota to come upon Lake Wobegon, Old Town. I smell since I went away. One more time, this dance together. Just you and I, now don't be shy. This time I know I'll hear the music. If you would hold me one more time. If you would hold me one more time.
Mr. Peter Schuster, sweet old song about the old hometown. Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, my hometown. It's quiet because spring is come and spring is awesome and magnificent, and everybody's quiet in the face of it. It's just almost too much for us. When everything turns green and there's so much life in the air, thinking about an afternoon like Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, after that tremendous rain that we had in the morning, walking outside in town, and the moisture in the air and the smell of grass coming up from beneath your feet. Almost too much, almost like being a fish and breathing through gills to smell it. Makes you feel like you're 17 again, and I couldn't take that. Birds arriving in town by the busload in Lake Wobegon come back from their winter vacations wherever they went. And the Norwegian bachelor farmers hung out their sheets this last week, finally washing their sheets after those long winter months. Now it's finally safe to do it. Walk around town now that the screens are on the windows. Hear all sorts of things coming out of houses that you weren't meant to listen to. Husbands and wives discussing things with each other. Listen to piano lessons, that tune that kids have been working on every spring. The one that goes da 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 dum da dum 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 dee 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 da dum da da dee. Smell floor wax coming out of houses. Smell hamburgers and onions cooking. Walk around town admiring the lawn ornaments and the yard work, admiring the flowers and eavesdropping on conversations. Hearing voices come out of the high school. Smell the macaroni hot dish that is cooking in the cafeteria, and upstairs Miss Melrose's English class reciting the words from Chaucer that everyone in my town has memorized for generations. Wanda Aprila with her shore sota, the drocht of March hath pierced to the rota, and bathed every vine in sweet liquor, of which thereto engendered is the flower. One Zephyrus eke with his sway to breath inspired hath in every holt and heath the tender crops, and the young sun hath in the ram his half-course run. And small of foulness, maken melodie that slapen all the nicht with open ear. Now small and foul, maken melodie in my hometown, in Minnesota. Although those lines were written 600 years ago, it still describes spring, the sweet breath of the wind and the tender crops and the small faula, maken melodie that sleep in all the night. I don't know if they sleep with open ear or not. Mine ear are closed during the night. I hope yours too. I went up there on Sunday, this last Sunday, on a pilgrimage of my own. Went up to visit my family and was surprised to find that they weren't home. I hadn't called ahead, but somehow I always had the feeling they were up there waiting for me to come, and so it was dismaying. Walked in, door was unlocked, of course, walked in the kitchen. Called, nobody was there, felt bad. Felt worse when it looked as if they'd left in a hurry out the back door. There was a dish on the table with cookie crumbs on it. My mother would never leave that there unless she was running. And so I felt bad. I've always been a little sensitive about whether or not people really liked me, or if there was something else involved, if they did it for a reason. I've worried about it since I was a kid. I saw my mother once give money to my best friend, Lance. She gave him $3. She was buying salve from him. He was selling salve door to door. But a lot of kids sold salve. Why did she have to buy so much? Suddenly I understood why he chose me to be on his softball team. Well, they weren't home, so I drove into town where there was a traffic rush on Sunday morning, people leaving church. It was Confirmation Sunday at Lake Wobegon Lutheran Church. There were 13 young people who were 14 years old who gone through confirmation class and who stood up at the altar rail on Sunday morning and were admitted into the circle of believers. 14 of them, including the Tollerud's third oldest girl, Lois, was there, I discovered afterward. Stood up there in the front of the church, these young people, and were asked by Pastor Inkvist some of the deepest questions about the faith, questions that have troubled theologians for centuries. And these young people answered them readily from memory. Stood there, including Lois, took their first communion and went outside afterward and stood under the trees and asked each other, "Were you scared? Were you nervous?" Said, "No, not as much as I thought I would be. I wasn't very nervous at all." And all went home with all their relatives who'd gathered for this great event and sat around and had chuck roast and potatoes and gravy and string beans and Jell-O with Miracle Whip. And some of them, the kids, had their first real cup of coffee, which they found to be bitter and oily and to make them dizzy and nauseous. But they are now Lutherans, and coffee is an article of the faith. They drank coffee by the gallon up at the Tollerud's house, where all the relatives had come to celebrate Lois's coming into the church. They drank it by the gallon because it had been, you see, a 2-hour service at the church. They don't hold back for this. There was the regular service plus the bonus, and in the Lutheran Church, there aren't the opportunities for movement, up and down in the pews and calisthenics that you find in other competing faiths. So people were stiff and lame when they got out of church, and sleepy and irritable. And all the Tollerudes especially crammed into that little house out on the farm. They drank coffee by the gallon as they sat there. The Tollerudes are all so agreeable, you see, all such quiet, agreeable people that they tend to make each other a little drowsy. And so drink more coffee, perhaps, than other people do. It is their substitute for a good argument. But if Lois had spoken up, they wouldn't have had to drink so much. she sat there, tall, shy, 14-year-old girl, wanting to tell them that she wasn't sure that she believed in God, that she had lost her faith. She thought, she wasn't sure, might have lost her faith on Friday night or sometime Saturday morning. She's a tall girl. She's grown about 4 inches this last year, which has worn her out. So she is even quieter than she used to be. Tall, shy girl with beautiful complexion, which she keeps beautiful and pale by blushing often, which is good for the circulation, and which makes boys admire her more, which makes her blush more. And she has become beautiful this last year. Sitting across from her in geometry class ever since September has been a boy who has looked every school afternoon as if he was just about to speak to her. And finally, on Friday, sent her a 23-page letter written in a small ballpoint hand, telling her how much she means to him, how important she is in his life, that he believes that God has written their names together in some kind of date book that God keeps in heaven, and that if they do not go on in life as a couple, that somehow nature itself will start to crumble, and the moon and stars will fall at a great inconvenience to the rest of us. But she wasn't thinking about him, about boys. It wasn't what made her blush, Lois, as she sat with her family around the table, eating chuck roast and potatoes and gravy, string beans, Jell-O with Miracle Whip. She was thinking that she ought to say to them that she'd lost her faith. She thought. Then they wouldn't have needed so much coffee. She thought she should say it, especially when her mother brought in her cake, her confirmation cake, a white angel food cake with Lois's confirmation verse written in blue frosting on the top of it. Be not conformed to this world, but rather be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds, that ye may know what is that good and perfect and acceptable will of God. It's a big cake. It was she used the extra fine nozzle on the frosting gun. Lois felt so ashamed. She wasn't sure if there was a God, because on Friday night, she'd been home babysitting. Her folks, Darrell and Marilyn, had gone into town to have supper with Lois's prayer parents, who are a couple. There's a couple appointed by Pastor Inkvist out of the congregation for each child who's to be confirmed. And your prayer parents, they pray for you for 3 weeks before you're confirmed. And when Lois found out that her prayer parents were Val Tollefson and his wife Ruth, people whom she had never liked, she felt her faith start to slip a little bit. And then watching television and thinking about it, watching a show on television in which men in white suits beat people senseless with clubs and shot them with machine guns and threw their bodies out of helicopters, which for television is fairly innocuous stuff. But in Lake Wobegon, where the picture is so fuzzy during the warm months, it was like radio, and somehow was more horrible and seemed more real for the picture being not there, just listening to it. It seemed to her, listening to this show at home late at night, hearing twigs crack in the backyard, that the world is not under the sway of love, but is controlled by dark, evil forces, that the world is under the control of a dark force that is constantly looking for us, constantly seeking us out and calling our name and calling us towards the dark edge. She thought of this and remembered how, as she sat in the house with her younger brothers and sisters and tried to pray, to ask God to please say that he knew her, that this prayer seemed to echo in her head as if it didn't go anyplace and was only imagination. So when she saw her confirmation cake and the verse, she felt ashamed and excused herself from the table before dishes and put on her blue jacket and walked out across the corn stubble, through the windbreak, out past the woodpile, out across the field, towards a farther line of trees, and towards the ravine where she'd spent so many hours as a child. Lois walked out on this brilliant sunny day. And when she came up towards where the gravel road meets the county road, she saw a car, a white car, and a man in a brown raincoat standing beside it, and felt that maybe this was the sign, maybe this was the parable of the Good Samaritan. This man was there, put there by God for her to go and testify to him, and in this way her faith would be restored. And she walked towards him down the gravel and saw, as she got closer, the man step towards her, and from the smile on his face and the look of his hand as he reached out towards her, she knew that he was put there by an evil force, and that she had come the wrong way, that this was evil roaming the world and looking for whomever it may devour, and she turned and tried to run and tripped and fell and said, "Please, please," she said, "don't do it." Which surprised me, because I hadn't seen her for a long time, but we had been close once. I'd been a friend of the family, enough of a friend so that I was her godfather at her baptism. I know I wasn't the first choice. I know I was kind of a joke candidate. I know that Darrell had wanted his brother Wally, and Marilyn had nominated me to show Darrell what a bad choice Wally would be, and Darrell said, "Well, all right, if you want him, go ahead." And there they were, stuck with me. I knew this at this child's baptism 14 years ago. There she was on the gravel. I said, Lois, I said, "Don't you remember me?" I said, "It's me, your godfather." I said, "Some places I'm almost famous. I'm surprised you didn't see who I was. How are you?" I said. I helped her up. I brushed the gravel off her jeans. She said, "I haven't seen you for 5 years. Why not?" I said, "I've been busy. I'm sorry. I should have been there." So we walked down the road, down towards the ravine. We walked along and talked about her loss of faith and other things. I reminded her of her baptism, what it was like. I said, did you ever meet my Aunt Lois? She was the one who you were named after. Well, Lois didn't know that. My Aunt Lois, you see, was Marilyn Tallerud's Sunday school teacher, so named the daughter after. My Aunt Lois was my youngest aunt, and she was single when I was a little boy, so she had a lot of time to spend with me. Her favorite nephew was what she told me. She said, I love you more than all the rest, but don't tell the others. Because she was such a young aunt, she was more like a sister. And we used to go on the bus, my aunt and I, when I was a boy, down to Minneapolis to visit her aunt, my great aunt, who actually wasn't that great, but it was a nice trip and fun because my Aunt Lois was young and she was like me. She loved to pretend and pretend we were somebody else, pretend we were somebody. Pretend this was our bus. It was a private bus, and we'd go any place we wanted to. Our favorite game to play was pretending that we didn't know each other. Pretend that we were strangers. I'd get up out of my seat as the bus headed towards Minneapolis. Get out of my seat and walk back up the aisle and turn around and come back to my seat and say, is this seat taken? May I sit here? And she'd say, sure, go ahead. I sat down. I'd say, it sure is a pleasant day today, isn't it? Which we didn't do in our family. We didn't talk to strangers. But you see, we were strangers, so we could be whoever we wanted to and do as we wished, so we talked to each other. Yes, she said, it's a pleasant day. She said, are you going to Minneapolis then? I said, well, I'm going to Minneapolis, but then I'm going on to New York City, where I am starring in a Broadway play. And then in a couple of months, I expect to go back to my home in Paris, France, where I have an apartment on the Champs-Élysées. I've come out to Minnesota only for the funeral of my aunt, an aunt who has died. She was fairly young. Well, that's a terrible thing. That's a terrible thing, she said. You must feel very bad. You must miss this aunt terribly. You must have been very close to her. I said, no, I wasn't particularly. But she was sort of family, I said. You see, I was adopted. I was an adopted child. My real parents were Broadway actors, and they sent me out here to live on the farm because they thought I would get more to eat. But people out here don't really understand people like me, and I can't say I really miss her all that much, which made her feel terrible. And she turned her face toward the window, and she looked out the window as the bus rolled along until minutes passed and I couldn't stand it any longer. I turned to her and I said, talk to me. And she said, I don't need to talk to you. I said, talk to me. She said, if you bother me, I'll talk to the driver and have him throw you off the bus. She said, I don't know you. I said, you know me. Say that you know me. She said, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never laid eyes on you before. I don't know you from a bale of hay. I said, you know me. Say that you know me. Until finally I couldn't stand it any longer. And I began to cry. And then she put her hand on my shoulder. And then I could be who I was again. That was another Lois years ago, as I walked along with Lois Tallerud. She said, why were you parked on the road standing there? on the road. I said, well, when I come to Lake Wobegon, I always like to come out here to these woods here, because when I was a boy, we used to camp out here. The Boy Scouts camped out here when Einar Tingvolt was our scoutmaster, and he used to get so mad at us because we wouldn't learn semaphore signals. When we were out here camping, he'd get so mad at us that he would sometimes throw things out into the woods. And when we were here one night, he grabbed the eggs that we were going to have for breakfast in the morning, and he threw them one at a time out over that line of birch trees. And each egg he threw harder and higher. And when he got done with all 12 of them, he reached for anything else he could find and grabbed his binoculars. And he couldn't stop himself. He was so furious at us. He threw them. As he threw them, he tried to draw them back. He tried to reach for the strap as it went out over the birch trees. And we looked for those binoculars all that evening and the next morning, and we never found them. And I've always felt that if I come out here and stand here, that someday, just by luck, I'd see a reflection of glass, and I'd find Einar's binoculars. And it's been 30 years, but they were good binoculars. And I could take them to him, and he would forgive me, but I've never found him. She said, that's a lie, isn't it? I said, yes, it is. The fact was, I was there because I'd had way too much coffee to drink. And I know people who live out there along that road pretty well, but not that well, to drive up to the house. So I was awfully glad when she invited me to come to the Tolleroods' house and have a piece of her confirmation cake. We walked in the door, and there they were, all sitting there around the table. Not too glad to see me, but glad enough. They said, would you like some coffee? I said, in just a moment. I would, yes. I said, is it still back there off the kitchen? They said, yes, go ahead. And then later I sat down for cake. I got a little piece of it that said, con but for on it. Con but for. My little piece of the confirmation verse. Be not conformed to this world, but rather be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds. Well, I'm transformed by this world, the one that I look at. It's so beautiful. I believe that it has the power to make us brave and to make us good. This world and each other and the people in it. It has the power to give us faith, the sweet breath of the wind and the tender crops and the small fowles maken melodie that slepen all the night with open ear. That's the news from Lake Wobegon.
Well, all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. Oh, Miss Jean Redpath, come and sing us a song here, would you?
Maxwell and breeze are bonny, or early falls the dew, and 'twas there that Annie Laurie gied me her promise true, gied me her promise true. Beautiful tune, I'm sure you know it. You could hum. Like dew on the gowan's lion is the fall her fairy feet, and like wind
voice is low and sweet. Her voice is low and sweet, and she's all the world to me. And for bonny Annie Laurie, I would lay me down indeed. Oh, you can do better than that. Don't be so shy. Her voice is low and sweet, and she's all the world to me. And for bonny Annie Laurie, I would lay me down
Thank you, Miss Jeannie. Thank you, Jeannie. I'll send out congratulations on the new baby to Liz and Jay in Pierce, South Dakota. Wish we were there, say Susan and David, who are here. And congratulations to Tony and Georgina, who rediscovered each other after 40 years. They're here in the audience tonight. Happy 93rd birthday to Susan Weinrich, St. Charles, from your granddaughter, who flew in to see the show and forgot her glasses. Thank goodness it's a radio show, she says. To Judy in New Jersey, St. Paul is great. Come west, young woman, says Ted. And hello to Kathy and Roger and the boys. This would have all been possible without you, but we send our love anyway, say Cindy and John. Happy anniversary to Alana and Clayton in Des Moines. You'll hear this when you get home. Love from Craig and Deb. And congratulations to Alan Chamberlain in Cazenovia, New York, who has a new hip. And Frank and Cynthia hope that it makes her happy. And why shouldn't it? Mine has given me a lot of pleasure, and that was just the left one. Johnny, let's do a little tune here. Let's give those folks at home a little chance to dance, and Mr. Chet Atkins, put on that gray bonnet here. Oh, that's our show for tonight. We got to hightail it out of here. We want to thank Chet Atkins and Mr. Johnny Gimble, Gene Redpath, the Butch Thompson Trio, Peter Strushko, Mr. Philip Brunel, Frederick Newman, Mr. Howard Moore, Joe Moraney back here on the clarinet, Mr. Peter Eklund, Bruce Kalin, Gary Gauger, Prudence Johnson, and Tom Keith for all being on our show tonight. And you too for coming. What a pleasure. Thank you so much. Pardon me if I'm sentimental when we say goodbye. Don't be angry with me should I cry. As you leave, yet I'll dream a little dream of days gone by. Now and then there's a fool such as I. Thank you so much for being here, folks. Thanks for coming, and thanks for letting us come into your homes. We'll see you next week, I hope. Good night now. Good night. Thanks for coming. You're a wonderful audience. Hope you had a good time. We'll see you soon.